record button here. Okay, so this is the first episode of the Think Tank, and today we're going to be focused on the idea of callings. And Pete, why don't you take 2 minutes and introduce yourself?
All right, thanks, Justin. So my name is Pete Arrington, and I serve with Act Beyond, formerly Mission to Unreached Peoples. And I'm headquartered here in the Plano office for Act Beyond. And our focus as an organization is 100% on unreached people groups and catalyzing movements to Christ among them. We focus on the least reached, the hardest areas. And my specific role is as the pre-field training coordinator here at Act Beyond. We have a philosophy of training from start to finish. And so I have the privilege of getting to focus in on the front end of that. It includes everything from before people even apply. We do an introduction to disciple-making principles that are involved in movements with just general folks that want to come and learn more about making disciples, all the way through to coordinating the candidate conferences for new applicants, and then the pre-field preparation for them, getting them to the field, helping with support raising and all of those pieces, and kind of coordinating. You know, we don't do all the training ourselves, but coordinating that.
Great. In fact, we hold that intro to CPM training multiple times per year. Why don't you share a little bit about that, and so people know that they can come to that?
Sure. Actually, our next one is April 11 and 12. It's a Friday evening, 6 to 9, and then all day Saturday. What it is we just get a group of folks together and we just dig into biblical principles. There's not a lot of lecture, but it's more just what can we learn? Did Jesus have a strategy for making disciples and the apostles? And what can we learn from that and apply? It's the same training that our folks on the field get, except they have a more extensive 2-week version of this. This is just an intro, and our goal is to release the people that come to one of these trainings more tuned in to looking for the people that God is already drawing to himself, and equipped with some tools in their tool belt to introduce them to who God is. So that's kind of the essence of it, and it's a great place to start. It's very applicable. I know past participants have left very encouraged. They've all felt like there's something that they could hang on to and do and be more effective and strategic in terms of reaching and discipling the lost.
Yeah, I went to the one that we held here late last year, I think, and we had a crowd of. Well, we maxed out the training room. I remember that we had a pretty big crowd there. So, and it was really good too. Okay, so today we're going to talk about calling, and why don't you tell your calling story?
That'd be great.
I'll tell mine, and that'll kind of get us to a framework of what are we talking about when we say what a calling is.
Sure. I think my story may be somewhat typical of everyone's. I kind of, as I grew, especially starting in high school even, I thought I might be. I was interested, let's put it that way, in aviation, and then just that didn't click. It didn't resonate, and so then into college I pursued just some other things and kind of floundered a little bit, really trying to figure out what am I supposed to do with life, what's my purpose, and things like that. But there were some pieces. I definitely had a heart for ministry. I enjoy interacting with people and things like that. And then during college, my wife, she wasn't my wife at the time, but my girlfriend then, we attended the Urbana big student mission conference. And really, as we wandered through all the halls and listened to the workshops and the exhibits, didn't really have a real like, aha, this is it. It was more of I'm not sure we're really called to go, but we can definitely see ourselves sending. We can help send other missionaries, and so we checked that off on the commitment card at the end of the Urbana conference. And later that year, we actually did get married, and supported some missionaries, prayed for them. What was really significant for us, though, is several years later when we were applying to Mission to Unreached Peoples, which is now Act Beyond, the Lord reminded us of that commitment to be senders of missionaries. And we were actually applying for a home office position. And it came back to us like, you committed to help send missionaries. Here's a way that you can do that, that we hadn't even thought of. And so that it was just like the Lord reminded us of that. And it's been we've done a lot of different things, but it's kind of helped guide us. It's been a filter, I guess, for the endeavors that the Lord has led us to through our role here on the stateside with Act Beyond.
Okay. Yeah. Mine was different from that. For me, just out of high school, I ran a bread truck for a while. So sort of like you, I was kind of just out of high school and, trying the college thing. And I did the college thing for a little while, and that didn't, for a variety of reasons, I didn't continue in that. I got into 2 political campaigns, both not as an activist, but basically I could type really fast, and I got a job as a data entry person. And then when the political campaigns were over, I went to an organization called AIMS, the Association of International Mission Services, which was on the grounds of the Christian Broadcasting Network, and just had a temp job there. And for me, it was a little different because one night, and I've told you this story, but for those who are watching this, one night I was doing a tape backup for this database, and this was back in the day when it took like 3-4 hours to do a backup. And I was just standing there going through the filing cabinets, looking at the literature that they had in there, and all of a sudden I was reading about this thing called Unreached Peoples, which was pretty new then. This was back in the late 80s. And I was, all of a sudden, I just felt as though I were looking through the filing cabinet out at these masses. I could actually see them. It was like a vision type experience. It doesn't happen to me often. And they were all looking at me, but they were all trying to say something, but they couldn't say anything because they were all voiceless. And then when that vision, that experience went away, it was like I knew that God wanted me. Somehow through that, I knew that I was supposed to be a voice for them, but I had absolutely no idea what that meant. And so it was a long time for me trying to figure out, what do I practically do with this? Does this mean I'm supposed to be, a missionary and go on the field? I didn't felt like that was necessarily it. And it took a long time to develop that. So yours, I mean, sometimes when we hear about a calling, we think about it in terms of like a spiritual experience or a kind of a supernatural kind of thing.
Right.
And sometimes it's a more gradual thing. So how would you define or describe a call in, general terms?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question, and it's one of those topics that we come across in missions where there's different opinions on it. I think that the Lord uses a variety of different kinds of calls to get people to where they need to be, and in some senses we're all called, we're all commanded to be a part of making disciples of all people groups. But then the specifics of that, and it's going to look different. So some people do have that spiritual, like the ray of light from heaven kind of thing, kind of like the Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus, or Peter's vision of the sheet coming down from heaven. I mean, there was some, wow, that was big. And then others, it's more mundane. And so let's just say that there's different ways that the Lord works, and I think we see that in Scripture as well. Some calls are more specific. Some are like Abraham. It's like, go, and I'll show you where you need to go as you go. And then the Lord added some details to that call to Abraham as he went and as he obeyed. I think of one of our former field leaders who his approach to call was, he served in a Muslim country, and he looked at all the Muslim countries in the world and found that Turkey was the, almost 100% Muslim and the most accessible. And he says, well, just logically it makes sense. And that's where he went. And he was a very successful worker there for many, many years. And So for some, it's more of just a common sense, like where's the need, just go. And others of us, maybe the Lord works in us different ways. We need a little more of a confirmation of that, or some kind of sense of direction from the Lord. Yeah.
I remember one friend of mine. You telling that story reminds me of a friend of mine who basically they felt like they were supposed to be involved in missions, but they didn't know where, so they just grabbed a list and they just started looking down the list for the people group that at the time, one of the people groups that they thought would be an interesting group, and it was really very little more than just picking a name off a list. They've been steadily involved in that group now for as long as I've been married and then some. So I think going on 20, 25 years, they've been involved in that group and made a substantial contribution to it. And, it was a little more than that. But there's this, I think you identified this kind of tension that we have in the sense that there's the Great Commission, which we talk about being for everybody.
Yeah.
And then for some people, there's a specific calling to a specific place. We talk about with the Great Commission, we talk about, praying, sending, praying, giving, going, right? So how does a person hold in tension those two ideas of we need to be involved in the Great Commission and the specifics of that? And do we as an agency or agencies in general should, how does that play into whether you really should be going on the field or not, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, again, the Great Commission is a command. But the Lord does seem to work through individuals. He's placed each of us where we are, given us each different gifts, passions, talents, our walks with the Lord. We've each got our own journey. And so really a lot of it is obedience let's obey the commands of Christ. Let's be listening to his voice in that process. I would say for some that maybe haven't felt that they have any kind of a call, I would encourage them to just start learning more about the nations if they haven't done so already. Take a perspectives class, or read a missionary biography, or somehow expose themselves to the nations and allow the Lord to show them some things as they look at that, and just be asking that question, what specifically can I do? I would caution those that want to wait for that supernatural, God's voice booming from heaven, kind of a call to not be inactive until they have something like that. Most of us probably don't have something as, boom, there it is. But the Lord does tend to confirm these directions, kind of like mile markers on the road, I guess, as we obey, as we take steps. It's like, oh, wow, this circumstance or maybe a passage of scripture jumps out at someone. There's things like that I think kind of help us navigate, like you said, that obedience to the Great Commission and to the commands of Christ, along with how might the Lord specifically be calling each one of us to be a part of that.
So everyone, we know that everyone has a responsibility to the Great Commission itself in some form. But not necessarily saying that everybody has a responsibility to go.
Absolutely.
Okay. Because, it's been said sometimes, and I'm sure this is a famous quote, and I know it's a famous quote. I'm sure I'm massacring this particular quote. So, but this idea that if you aren't called to stay, you're responsible to go. And I wonder about that.
I think what the heart of that is it's kind of flipping on its head. The general assumption is, well, you shouldn't go unless you have a specific call to go. And we do see that there are needs. We keep asking the Lord for more laborers for the harvest. Jesus said the laborers are few, and that's still true today. So I really think that's the heart of that quote. But the specific application of it is, I think it might be more accurate to say you need to know what your calling is and obey it.
Mm.
And not that it's, necessarily like this one laser beam thing, but what are you doing to obey God's call in your life and his leading, his prompting, his voice? All too often we encounter people at the end of their lives who say, yeah, I thought the Lord called me to missions when I was younger, when I was 20 or whatever, and I never went. I never did it. And what a tragedy. Like, we would hate for anyone to complete their lives and have had that call and not actually act on it. So that's a whole other topic. I mean, just what are the obstacles that someone would need to overcome? There's, it takes a lot of trust in the Lord, overcoming fear, and a lot of times it's maybe for provision. A lot of folks are terrified of raising support, which many missionaries have to do. So there's a lot of other things why people don't, I guess, obey that call or take steps in that direction.
Do you think that having a calling or having a clear sense of calling, I mean, obviously I can think of outlier cases where this is not true, but in general, do you think that calling gives you a sense of staying power when things are difficult?
Yes. And I would say most mission organizations, and I haven't done a thorough poll, but I know from Act Beyond, and I heard back from my friend Mike with Frontiers, we look for that. We want to see that people have that. There's a variety of reasons, but one of them is it can give you something to hang on to when the going gets rough. When you're out there and it's hard, you do need to say, has God called me, or was this just like some emotional high that I said yes, and here I am, and I made a big mistake? It does help to know that you're there because God has put you there, and that you've been doing, like, you're getting there was part of you obeying God's leading in your life. So I would definitely say, yeah, there's a benefit to having some kind of something that you can look back on that says, yes, I know that this is why I'm here.
But that calling, that's something that you're looking back on. Like for you, it wasn't any kind of, the heavens parted and the light shone out. It doesn't have to be a mystical, if you will, experience. It can be something much more like mile markers on the road.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And for us personally, my wife and I have had several instances where, as we made kind of key junctures in this particular ministry of, serving with Act Beyond, sending missionaries to the field, the Lord has impressed upon us certain passages of Scripture that really confirmed for us that we should take this next direction.
Mm-hmm. So that brings to another question. You want to have something that tells you the direction that you're walking in.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have something that you can look back on, right? But as you said, you want to know that it wasn't just an emotional moment where you felt something, but then later on you wonder, was this just a storm of hormones, if you will?
Yeah.
So how do you go about verifying a call?
Mm-hmm. I think that's important. And a lot of folks, they need some sort of confirmation for a call. Definitely through Scripture, through counsel of other believers. I think it's a lot of folks have just asked God to give them some kind of confirmation through circumstances. So there's a variety of things like that. Relationships, as we learn and research, the Lord can give us information that's like, oh yeah, this would be a fit. I think of Brian Hogan. He came and shared at our Perspectives class recently, and he shared about when they were on their way to Mongolia, they thought, okay, the Lord's leading us to Mongolia, but his wife needed some more confirmation. Mm-hmm. And so they were praying about that. And wouldn't you know, if Mongolia just started popping up all over the place, like they randomly, she was in the grocery store and some lady in the produce aisle starts talking about Mongolia. And they went to a big conference where they handed out, different unreached people groups for various people to pray for. And wouldn't you know, she got Mongolians.
Mongolia.
And like, that's not just coincidence. I think the Lord's doing something here. So, I mean, there's a variety of ways like that. And I think as long as we're listening to the Lord, I'll be honest, it's not easy. We've had our own situations where it's like, Lord, please just speak and make it clear and get this thing over with. And it's been so hard. It's like, we just want to hear something or just know, or, making a major life change like this. We don't want to put our family through this if this isn't really what the Lord's telling us to do. So it may take some wrestling. It may take a process, and that's okay. But I think ultimately the Lord gives you a peace. At least he's given us a real sense of a peace. Even when it was emotionally hard for us to take those steps of obedience to the direction he was calling us to, we still knew that was the right thing to do and had that peace in our hearts to move forward in that. So, it is kind of a process of confirming that call, I guess. Or
that Brian Hogan story, that's I haven't actually read there's a sheep in my bathtub, I think is the name of the book, right? Yeah. I haven't read that all the way through yet, but the first couple of chapters were just, I was reading them on a plane, and I just had to kind of, cover and try not to laugh out loud because it was crazy stuff.
Yeah.
I remember when we were thinking about going to a particular place in Southeast Asia, I was probably a little more gung-ho, and Heidi, my wife, was maybe a little bit more cautious about the thing. And we were both wondering, is this something that we really should do? And I was, why not? And anyway, I said, okay, what we'll do is, we said, we'll pray. We'll ask God to give us this sign that the name of the place where we were going to be or the name of the country would just start cropping up. And it did, literally. I forget the exact circumstances at the moment, but she was going to a prayer meeting thing later the same evening after we prayed, and she got there, and wouldn't you know it, within like 5 minutes that she was there, part of the conversation mentioned the name of the country that and she hadn't even told anybody that we were thinking about doing this.
Wow.
So it was, and then, it just kind of got hilarious after a week or two, where like daily these things would just crop up. It was mentioned on an episode of Friends that we happened to be flipping past on television, and just stuff like that. It just got hilarious.
That's a new one. God, all through Friends. All right.
Yes, that's right. Comes in all sorts of places. Okay, a little controversial. What happens if you feel called to something, but say your pastor or wise elders around you are saying they don't necessarily see that calling? Maybe they honestly don't see it, or maybe they would prefer that you didn't go overseas. There's all sorts of reasons why, but what do you do in that instance?
Pray harder. We actually had that situation. We were in Spokane, had been serving as regional representatives for Act Beyond, and our mission leadership had asked us to move to the home office, which at the time was in Seattle. And my pastor, from his understanding of what that new role would entail and that move, basically told, he felt like we shouldn't move, that I shouldn't assume that new position. And, there was an element of that he was right. The new position, it was director of recruiting. It had a lot of administrative parts to it, which isn't necessarily my strong suit. And he could see that wasn't my strongest gifting. And so what were we to do? Here our pastor was telling us, no, I don't think you should do that. So we prayed more and just really wrestled through that. I think you have to look at the whole balance of all of the ways that God is moving. A lot of times, he puts these leaders and wise spiritual people in our lives, and they're right. But other times, they're not always right. And so, but just walk through that with humility. I think it's dangerous when somebody comes in and says, I've been called to this, and they just kind of ram through regardless of, lots of wise counsel and circumstances, whatever. So that is a tricky path to navigate.
Okay. So if somebody came into Act Beyond and wanted to apply, but they just said that they wanted to be involved in missions. They knew the Great Commission and this is what they wanted to do, but they didn't necessarily have a specific calling to a specific place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, scenario A. Or scenario B, they come in and they feel like they're called to a specific place, but when you talk to their pastor for a reference, the pastor says, he gives a negative viewpoint. So what happens then for those two scenarios?
Okay, let's look at scenario A. So kind of more of a general call to missions, or maybe even call to unreached peoples, but no idea where to go with that. What we would do there is we would just start this dialogue and seeking the Lord together with them, of having them start praying through maybe some of our openings where we would love to place a new team among a least reached people group today. Mm-hmm. And we'll also look at what are their skills or giftings, or who has God made this person to be, and how might that align with a specific placement or location or ministry, and look for a fit, look for some direction there. And interestingly, like we've done this, we've been through this process many times with people. He does seem to lead and direct, and things start coming up, and there's just kind of an uneasiness about a certain direction, and so we'll look at something else. And the Lord is sovereign to guide and direct. It's His harvest and His laborers. Now, scenario B, someone says they've got a call. It's a very specific call, and their pastor says, well, yes, but. And we've also had this happen a number of times. In that case, we would look at other people in their lives as well, and also pray through that. Might it be that it's only the pastor that feels that way? But if we start talking to others that they've done local ministry with, or who know them well, who are saying, well, yeah, we just don't think that they're cut out to do this, or not at this stage in life, or whatever, or they need more training. I mean, those are kind of usually the objections that someone like that would raise. If we're hearing that from multiple sources, then that seems to be a little stronger than just one person saying something like that. Right. And I think, again, with that calling, sometimes there are times when you hear these examples of people that are like, man, I got this call and others opposed me in it, but I knew I was called and went for it, and the Lord does bless that. You hear these testimonies about it after the fact, but I think there needs to be real caution in that too. Of are they hearing the Lord right? Generally, when we obey the Lord, it's not easy or comfortable. It tends to be more radical, and so it's possible that there's going to be voices in our lives that are not walking in that same level of radical obedience with the Lord that would oppose that kind of a call.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And it seems like the problem is less that people think they have a calling when they don't, and more the fact that a lot of people who have a calling never act on it, just given the missionary numbers. It's not like we've got too many missionaries applying.
Correct.
So
correct. Yeah.
If they are applying, then probably there is a germ of a calling there, one would think.
Seems like there is, for the most part. And again, those of us that are working with new applicants, we're going to be looking for that. But yeah, most of the time, someone does come along with, I feel like God's, kind of pushing me forward here, and I got to do something with this.
Mm-hmm. Ever encounter somebody that you were certain that they were called? I mean, it just seemed like to you it was obvious, it was plain on their face and in their actions, but they didn't feel like they were called, or they, for whatever reason, they didn't see it? I'm just curious if that scenario ever happens.
Well, that's a good question. personally tend to not assume that I can discern someone else's call that clearly, that I would know it, but they wouldn't, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's certainly people that I know that man, they're just awesome people, and the Lord certainly gifted them in certain ways, and I could picture them, and they maybe could picture themselves serving in a, say, missionary to a specific country or something like that. But they're not there at that point. And so, yeah,
Yeah. And that's, I'm sure you're right in that, in the sense that we shouldn't assume that we can discern the calling on somebody else. There's been a few people from time to time that I've thought, man, you would do so good on the field. I think, it just seems like you have a heart for people and other cultures and things like that. But that doesn't necessarily. All right, here's a different one. Role of a calling in marriage. What happens if, like, I've seen some people who have said that they feel called, but their spouse, for whatever reason, hasn't felt called in the same way. I was talking with a guy just not too long back where he said he would love to be involved, but that's not where his wife was, and so, he did what he could right now. So how does that play in?
Yeah, that's an interesting scenario, and I'd say we run into that all the time. One spouse is like, man, I'd be there in a heartbeat, but my wife just isn't called to missions. And I know our friend Andy Campman with Every Ethne, he's adamant about counseling singles. Make sure that person is also called to missions before you get into a marriage like that, where you maybe have different callings. And but say that you're in that marriage, and I mean that's a union, and God has blessed that. Again, you really need to pray. It's could be a disaster waiting to happen if you press on with that call and both spouses are not on board with that. There are situations where, because of a marriage, one spouse becomes more open to the idea of going to like overseas on the mission field. But a lot of times, like you said, that couple won't ever go. They'll just try to do what they can from here, without both of them being, fully on board or feeling that call.
So if somebody came to Act Beyond or any other agency and they said, it was like the husband has the clear call, and the wife is saying, you know what, I don't necessarily feel like I am called, like, or maybe it's the other way around. I mean, how often have you ever seen spots where it's the wife that has the calling and the husband is kind of coming along as well?
Yeah.
Okay. So if somebody comes and one of them has a clear sense of their calling and the other one is where you go, I shall go too, kind of thing. How does that play?
That's always a tricky situation for a mission organization. I don't know if I have the authoritative how we would handle something like that, but definitely that is a cause for concern, and to move slowly to really see, how's this going to pan out. If somebody's their call is, I'm just going to follow him or her and support them in that work, doesn't always pan out. Most of us, the Lord has uniquely gifted each one of us for specific roles, and at some point that may not, following someone else and supporting their ministry may not be enough to keep the other person in the picture. That's always a tricky situation. We prefer to see a husband and a wife. They may not be the same exact sense of call, but at least that they're both on board with, hey, this is the direction we're going, and we believe God's leading us to do this.
What happens if you have a single on the field who gets married, and the person they marry doesn't necessarily have the same calling. And then what happens?
We grab him by the shoulders and say, "What were you thinking?" I don't know.
Because one of the things that causes people to leave the field, I mean, I was talking with Jeff, who's our director of HR here at Act Beyond, and yeah, we were talking about the fact that there are kind of two stages of life where people tend to come back from the field. One is like around the 20s when somebody's getting married or they're having kids, that early stage. And then the other is usually much later, somewhere between like 40s, 50s, but basically they're coming back because of parental health care issues. Their parents have gotten to a point where they can't live on their own or whatever reason, so they have to come back to care for their parents. Those are the two kind of stages of life. So if you've got a young single, and let's face it, statistics being what they are, single males are not that common in Michigan. Single females outnumber single males in most agencies by a factor of somewhere between 5 and 7 to 1. What happens when that single female wants to get married and there's no single males in the mission? What do you do then with your calling, but you also your desire to get married? If you find somebody or whatever, what happens then?
Well, we're really going into we could do a whole nother conversation on this. Marriage and missions, how to help the singles find their calling and their spouse.
How does the sense of your calling?
Yeah,
you have this sense of I am called to do something, and that conflicts with this sense of, I don't want to live my entire life alone.
Exactly.
How does one counsel them, about that?
I think it's important in any kind of relationship when someone is pursuing, a spouse, to explore calling with that spouse. I can think of one of our single ladies who had been on the field and had kind of set that threshold, like, hey, when I'm 30, I'm going to start looking, and, did like a eHarmony or, some kind of online thing.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But she was very specific in that this guy had to have a missions calling as well. And that was evidenced through, some of his life choices up until that point. And so they did get married. They spent some time in the States, just building that foundation together. That's a value for us as an agency, is that, we want that married couple to be kind of sent out as one together from the States, not, well, she's from here and he's from there kind of thing. And then they're serving successfully on the field together. So there's definitely, I think, a lot of room for pursuing a person that God has given a similar call to. And I think that can really help in that marriage relationship as you serve the Lord together as a unit, to be able to do things more together, I guess, instead of, his call, her call kind of thing.
What if a calling changes? Does a calling change? Was it really a calling if it changes?
Yeah. I really appreciated, and Justin, you passed this along from Edward Lauber, and he talked about, some folks that they've sensed this call from God at some point in their lives, and then it almost becomes like that call is, as he put it, immutable, like unchanging, and doesn't matter what, it's never going to change, and they got to do that regardless of wise counsel, or even, it's almost like they turn off the option for God to modify, direct, change that call in their lives. So I think that could be an issue. I haven't personally seen that happen a lot, but apparently he had a situation where that came up. And I would just say, if that calling is from God and it's him directing you, be open to him directing you again. It's not like he just sets you rolling in a certain direction and doesn't touch you again. I know for my wife and I personally, we did feel a specific call to helping send missionaries to the field, but we always hold that option open that at some point he may say, all right, now it's time for you to go. So just be open to how the Lord's leading. I guess, again, just that discipline of listening to his voice and obeying him. I don't know. That calling and obedience is really closely related, I believe. And so continuing to seek him, and we're all called to Christ, called to be his ambassadors. It absolutely can change.
I think the scene that always comes to my mind for whatever reason, I mean, when you think of a calling, a lot of times people seem to think of, like you said, Paul on the Emmaus Road, right? Mm-hmm. In the light. The first time I ever saw Paul on the Emmaus Road, it was actually in a
Damascus Road.
It was yes, Damascus Road. Thank you. Anyway, it was in one of these comic books, where they portrayed him in kind of. It was done in modern terms. So here's Paul in his military outfit riding in a Jeep with and everything. But it was kind of funny. But the one that actually comes to my mind more than Paul is the idea of Jesus at the seaside calling the disciples and them just leaving their boats and following him, and in that sense, it was almost the antithesis of a mystical moment. It was just Jesus showing up and just saying, come follow me. It was a verbal, personal, intimate thing. And he went a lot of places and they followed him everywhere he went.
That's true.
And sometimes, Luke 10, he sent them out. And then they came back, and, then at the end, he sends them out with the Great Commission. But the thing that strikes me is that it's almost like sometimes when we talk about calling, I think for me, one of the dangers that I have is that I want this sense of, it's like I was talking with Heidi the other day, and she said it's like you want this sense of, this is what I'm doing, and then it's what I do, and I don't necessarily have to go back and ask God about the next thing.
Yeah.
I've got my marching orders. I'm doing my thing that you gave me to do.
Right.
I don't need to come back and check in for instructions because I already know what I'm doing. But that's not really the way it works, is it?
I mean, I think as we look through Scripture and then look at examples of our contemporaries, we see that playing out. Paul had his Damascus Road call, but then he went to Arabia for a while, and then he went different places, and then he was on a missionary journey, and God gave him the Macedonian call, and kind of directed or modified that call within his obedience. He's already moving forward. So what directed that, and I think that is a key. Is there may be people that are sitting there saying, "Well, I don't have a call," and again, I'm not going to attempt to know everyone's situation, but it is key to be moving forward in some kind of obedience to the Lord, and he may through that then direct or lead in a certain way, and that would be part of your call. So yeah, I mean, very rarely do we see God give us our 5-year plan and here you go, boom, boom, boom. It's more of that Abrahamic call, like start going and I'll show you where to go when you get there.
Yeah. I would love a 5-year plan, but the thing that I worry about there is, whenever I want God to write on the wall and give me the plan, I realize, back in the biblical story, that didn't work so well for the king that,
no.
So
help me to listen before you have to start writing on walls.
Yes, very definitely. Well, I think we've covered all the questions that I had at this point. Is there anything that, when you think of a calling, this is something that you always want to pass along to somebody, or when you're exploring the calling, or is there things that you talk with them about, or some final thoughts?
Yeah. Well, uh, I just reiterate, I think it is important. Um, Again, there are those more general calls and then specific calls. We've all been called. I love some of these passages, like from Ephesians. It's one of my favorite books. Um, Ephesians 2:10, for we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And so ask yourself, am I, walking through my life seeking the Lord for those good works that he's prepared in advance for us to do? Um, I love the passage where Jesus says, I've completed the work that you called me to do. And there were still a lot of needs left in Israel, not to mention all the rest of the world. But Jesus knew his calling, and he spent a lot of that time in intimacy with the Father for some of the specifics and that leading of that. And I think he sets a good example for us of, we need to focus on doing the things that God has called us to do. We're not we're not necessarily called to fix every need out there, but every one of us does have a call, and how are we obeying that call? And then later in Ephesians, Paul says, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. And he's talking about, part of it is, our calling to follow Christ. He says there's one body and one spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But then he goes on to say, we've all been given different gifts. And so every part of the body, I'll skip to the end of that little passage, he says, from Christ, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. And so what a beautiful picture of, as we seek to obey the Lord and fulfill the specific roles and callings that he's given us, we get to see this awesome body of Christ built up and his kingdom purpose is fulfilled. So that's a huge encouragement. I would just pass that on. It's like, wow, what an awesome picture. We get to be a part of that. Live out your calling. Don't let fear and doubt waylay you from doing what God's called you to do.